Hello, everyone. So welcome to our attachment theory webinar. We've got Karen Miller here, and I'm very excited because she's got new things on her presentation that I haven't heard of. So I'm going to learn as well. Over to you, Karen. Karen, if you don't mind to introduce yourself and just go through what you got to say, what we can learn from you. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me. So I'm Karen Miller. I am dual qualified as a midwife as well as being a psychologist, and I've done both roles for about 30 years. Delivering babies, but also specialising in attachment in my psychology roles. So particularly worked with babies who've experienced trauma and abuse. So that's become my speciality. But obviously this talk will basically be around normal attachment and attachment patterns as they form. And I think it's important to say that we've all obviously had experience of being parented, and some of us may well also be parents or grandparents. So I apologise in advance if anything I say today may be triggering or upsetting. Sometimes I know it might cause us to sort of analyse our own experiences, and that's okay. If you need to take some space, that's absolutely fine. Or if you feel you want to email me at the end or make contact, that's absolutely fine. And also challenge anything I say as well from your own experiences, because I'm really open to that. I'm not a complete expert and I'm always learning all the time. So there'll be opportunity at the end for questions, but I will try and make it a bit more interactive. We haven't got a huge group, so it's not quite as overwhelming as like sometimes when I've got 100 in the room and it can be a bit scary to speak out, but feel free to interact. Nothing you can ever say is silly, no questions are stupid questions. So it's just like a bit of a chat really about attachment online. But anyway, here we go. So this is a short seminar for 45 minutes with some questions at the end on attachment theory and how it links really to our personality, our behaviour, and our relationships as we go through life. So just some of you may be already aware of this I don't always agree with these attachment patterns, but people get subdivided into these kind of categories of you're securely attached, ambivalently attached, avoidantly attached, or disorganized attached. I think we can switch between all of those as aspects of everyone's personality that might sit somewhere along all of those spectrums. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about those tonight, but just to make you aware that those are kind of the four main attachment sort of labels that people can get. So going back to being a baby and when you first enter this world, anyone any ideas? There's three fundamental things we need as babies and infants when we're first born. Anyone any idea what they could be?
Nutrition.
Nutrition. Yeah, food. That's often what everyone says, but it's actually not in the top three. Yeah, we always think that we're born and we need to eat, don't we? But actually, no. There's three.
So oxytocin, cuddles.
Yes, yeah, cuddles.
We've got Mandy who says love, touch.
Love, touch, yes. Yeah, that's right in there. That's really what babies need. That sort of sensory feeling of being cuddled and warm and nurtured. So that's like really, really important. Anything else? So we've got nurture and security of being cuddled as number one. And there's two other things we need to feel as well.
We've got Lucy who says protection.
Protection, yeah, we need to feel safe from harm, safe from predators. So yeah, feeling safe, feeling secure and cuddled and warm. And one other thing that's really important. So we need to feel heard. And so it's about vocalization. So feeling heard, feeling safe and feeling nurtured are the three fundamental things that we need. And it's interesting, isn't it, that food isn't in there. And I think that's from my work with children and adults with eating disorders. I think all of that's kind of linked, as in food not being a fundamental need, but it's become something that we use in later life that plays out around maybe a disorganized attachment pattern. So yeah, babies need to feel safe, protected from danger, to feel secure with close comfort and proximity of their caregiver, and to feel heard, so the responsiveness of the caregiver to their cries. And infants instinctively attach to their carers. So the minute you're born, it doesn't always have to be the mum. It's usually the one that has the most care of the child. So we always think of the mum because they are the one that usually has the most time, but you can attach to someone else if they spend a huge amount of time with you in the first few months of life. So optimum caregiving requires you to be warm, responsive and available to your child versus the kind of cool, insensitive and unpredictable behaviour. And obviously, parenting's hard, it's 24 hours a day, and we can all have times when we don't feel particularly warm, responsive, and available, and that's absolutely fine. What we do need is consistency. And if you're chronically cool, insensitive, and unpredictable around your child, then that's going to be a problem. But we all have bad days, and usually we make up with it, even if we've lost our temper. We'll often make up with a cuddle or what we call repatriation afterwards, and that's fine. So sometimes people think, oh, I lost my temper once, that's going to damage my child. It certainly won't if the majority of the time you're consistently warm and responsive. So primary attachment windows. So while the baby's in the uterus is a key time for attachment. We often think that attachment doesn't start till you're born, but actually it starts, all those attachments start forming. What kind of things do you think are really important to that baby in the uterus to make them feel safe and secure? There's been quite a lot of research. There was in fact, a research paper came out yesterday around this, doing research into healthy attachments in the womb. What kind of things do you think when you're pregnant really help that attachment?
Oh, mine loves singing.
Yeah. So noise, voices. Obviously, the voice they're going to hear the most is that of the mother because they're attached to that one. So yes, lots and lots of noise and chatter, and what might not be optimum thing to be sort of around when you're pregnant that could disrupt the attachment. Any ideas?
Margarita said stress.
Stress, exactly. Yeah. So there is lots of research to show that if you are stressed in pregnancy, and that could be for a variety of reasons and sometimes out of your control, you release a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol coursing through the body during pregnancy can have a really negative impact on the development of the baby. So my PhD was around this subject. So we were looking at babies who'd maybe experienced quite a lot of stress with domestic abuse in pregnancy. So mums who came forward who were experiencing a lot of stress, usually through conflict in relationships. And their babies tended to be born as the ones that would be quite unsettled, quite difficult to bond with. They would be the babies that would be presenting with colic and with reflux. So it was kind of a vicious circle of they'd had a sort of difficult time personally in pregnancy, and then that difficult time kind of continued after birth by having an unsettled baby. And that's probably linked to the amount of cortisol that was going around in their system whilst they were pregnant, that was sort of putting the baby on high alert as well as themselves. And then obviously we've got what we call the primary attachment phase, the first 6 to 9 months of age. Anyone working with like babies around this age, 6 to 9 months, is there anything that you kind of notice when babies reach it's usually around 8 months, something starts to happen? Is anyone aware of what that could be? Anyone working with babies? Is there something they start to get separation anxiety around this? So the children being dropped off at nursery at 8 months. I mean, some babies cry all the time, but 8 months is a really key area for children to start to realise that they are separate beings from their mum or their caregiver. And separation is suddenly really scary. And it's when you've worked out that actually you're starting to become independent, and the thought of separating from your caregiver who gives you all the warmth and nurture and safety is terrifying. So that's when we start to see what we call stranger danger, and it's quite a key attachment phase. And for me, working as a psychologist with babies and children who might have experienced trauma, we would probably see a child who maybe hasn't had a very good start for the first 9 months of life, who maybe has experienced excessive trauma, abuse, violence, neglect. They might not react at this time. They might be quite ambivalent about the fact that their care is gone because so many parts of their brain have been sort of shut down over what they may have experienced in the earliest 9 months of life. We'll talk a bit more about that later. And then there's another primary attachment window, adolescence, which obviously anyone who's ever lived with teenagers, I've got 3 of them, will understand this is another reshaping of the brain. So all of those neurons that were fixed massively in the first 6 to 9 months of life, and then they sort of continue to learn and grow and connect through the next years, and then they all disconnect again in adolescence. Why do you think that might be? Why do you think it all kind of kind of combobulates again in adolescence? Why does that happen to the brain, do you think? Are you on mute?
Oh, I'm sorry. To
That's all right.
individualize and separate.
That's right. Yeah. It's kind of like, yeah, brains forming into them becoming adults, which is a whole different role in life, isn't it? You can be a child, but then all the synapses need to disconnect and reconnect to make your adult brain. And there's a lot of that is around risk taking, learning independence and learning new skills. And it can be quite a difficult time. And I think the research shows that the more difficult the first few years of your life may have been, the more difficult you may find adolescence, or the longer you'll go through the adolescent period. So some children go through it quite quickly and come out the other end, whereas some have a very long, prolonged period of adolescence, going up to sometimes the age of 24. So neuropsychology is moving on vastly, being able to look at the brains of children and being able to see the impact possible of neglect and abuse and that impact that it has on the brain. So in this is quite an old picture, but obviously you can see the brain of a 3-year-old child that's suffered, that's had a normal childhood with a normal caregiving experience compared to one who has suffered extreme neglect. And obviously not only can you see the size difference, but you can see that some of the sort of midbrain is the parts of the midbrain which control of our fight and flight responses are much more developed. Why do you think that might be? And what do you think the cost could be for if you've got that really developed fight or flight response because you've suffered neglect and abuse? How might you appear as a 3-year-old? Obviously, we can't see inside their brains, but what we might be seeing is their behaviour. What do you think they might be like?
Erratic.
Yeah, erratic. The ones most probably being labelled now as ADHD or ASD. Those sort of hypervigilant, highly mobile, constantly on the go type of children. Yeah.
Mandy says angry.
Angry, yes. They might be the ones where, their cortisol levels and their adrenaline levels are so highly wired because they've had to defend themselves. And that part of the brain, the amygdala, which controls our responses to fear, is so sensitized and so alert, that they're more likely to be the ones to lash out very quickly, to react very quickly when they're put under stress. And we sometimes see that sort of particularly in nurseries, those children that are the ones that are much more difficult to control, much more likely to lash out, and have the prolonged temper tantrums compared to what we would see as maybe normal development.
Margarita said withdrawn.
Withdrawn as well. So we often think, yeah, that neglected children are going to be angry, but the opposite response to that is to be withdrawn, to withdraw, to protect yourself, a bit like the little boy is doing in the picture. The world's not a safe place. I can't rely and predict what adults will do or other children. So I'm going to keep myself safe and withdraw as much as possible. So some children will mix between being withdrawn and aggressive. Some will be permanently aggressive or wired, and others would be permanently sort of removed and quiet and watchful. So yeah, adapted brain development. So we've all got all these parts of the brain that we're starting to delve into more and more with neuropsychology. So we've got this bit, the amygdala, which we see as the part of the brain that processes our emotions. It's the one that causes us to fight or flight, to run when we get scared, or usually when we're younger, to run to our caregiver, to be protected. So it's our fear center, really. And what we see in children who have experienced abuse and neglect is that that part of the brain is so overdeveloped and in a constant state of heightened alert. Then we've got what we call the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that regulates our hormones. It's the memory bank. So that's the one where we have learnt from an early age, if I do this, this happens. So if I cry, my mum comes to me. And those sort of memories will stay with us. So it's how we form our sense of identity, how we learn that what we do and how we react gains a response from people. So if you have been ignored or shouted at or hurt when you've been crying, that will be stored in your memory bank. And that will really sort of be quite a significant way in which you release your hormones and you respond to stress going through life. So the way we regulate our emotions through the hippocampus is very dependent on what we've experienced going through life. And then we've got the prefrontal cortex, which is obviously the bit for the pictures we just saw. The prefrontal cortex would be the bit that grows and develops along with the stimulus that we receive as we grow up. And that part of the brain is really what controls our rational decision making. It allows us to learn. It allows us to control our impulses, to make risk assessments, to be able to plan and to have social skills. So all those really, really key factors that we need to grow up healthily, to be able to integrate into society, to form relationships, friendships, to hold down jobs. All of that needs to grow with a a really good attachment from birth. And obviously we saw from the picture before of the 3-year-old, the prefrontal cortex was much smaller overall. So that probably will result in learning disabilities, poor impulse control, poor social skills, mental health, poor self-esteem, all those things that later impact us in adult life, around how we form relationships, and sustain employment as well. And then some people talk about being left brain, right brain person. Left brain, logic, reasoning, factual thinking. Right brain, much more linked to imagination, feelings, and intuition. And there has been some research to show that people who operate out of the right brain possibly tend to be more anxious, have raised amygdalas and hippocampus, but I'm not sure. I think it's more about I think it's quite a difficult way to think because we're all very different, and there's a lot more research going on around that. Yeah, this is a great video, and I think apologies if people have seen it, but I mean, all my years of doing psychology, this was just an amazing video when it came out about 5 years ago. My daughter says everyone has seen it, so because she did A-level psychology, I said, "Oh, Mum, everyone's seen that video." But I think it just demonstrates
curve and return, isn't it?
Yeah, reciprocity. I think it demonstrates it so well if it will play. I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. And the baby in this video, he must be about 8 months, actually, 8, 9 months. But reciprocity, while you're doing that, sort of describes that sort of relationship, that attachment relationship. And I'm often, when I'm working with mums, newborn mums, they'll say, I feel silly talking to my baby, or I feel silly talking to my bump when I'm pregnant. And actually, it's so important to vocalize, even, if we think that they don't understand. It's just, vocalization, reading to children is so important for brain development. And the way we do it is really important. And I think this video really shows how important it is, because obviously the baby's babbling is pre-verbal, kind of is babbling away, but there is definitely a conversation going on, which really just demonstrates how important it is to kind of communicate with youngsters.
Did you understand it though? Yeah. No. Okay. All right. Huh? Oh, nice. Not this one. This is the grand finale of this one. Okay, yeah, that's the last one. That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they did some stuff this time. Exactly what I was thinking. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Don't bring that in. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah. Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't bring it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's got to be clean. It's got to be tight. That's what I said. They did. It was like, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, what in the world? Don't do that here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. 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 Really? I thought the same thing. We think a lot alike, huh? Oh, that's crazy.
Any thoughts? Anyone, any thoughts on seeing that video, even if you've seen it loads of times before? Anything anyone wants to comment? You can put it in the chat as well.
It's just the mirroring. I love the mirroring, the body language, the facial expression.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And it's just a great example, isn't it? It's like, yeah, I showed it to a group of parents who we were working with who are struggling to sort of bond with their babies. And they were like, but he's talking nonsense and the baby's talking nonsense. But that's the whole point, isn't it? It's like, it's a conversation. Yeah, and they're taking turns. Yeah. Any other comments?
I've got Mandy says it's one of my favorites too. I love talking to babies and getting into a full-on conversation between baby babbling and me.
Yeah, that's
But
brilliant.
another comment, I don't know if I dare to pronounce your name, Noroliani, the interaction.
Yeah, yeah. And there was some research came out this week. I don't think it's, I mean, it's not rocket science. I think it's stuff we've already known. They attach sort of neurons to babies' brains and would be reading or having a conversation with a baby, and obviously see all of the positive hormones being released throughout the body, all those soothing, calming hormones, which is obviously if you're repeatedly having those kind of nice conversations and interactions with your children, then obviously you just know that all of the nice sort of hormones that promote optimum brain growth are being released throughout. And I mean, also really important for people working with children as well, like to have those kind of interactions, because that's really important. So in order to create a secure attachment, we need to be available and responsive, especially in times of needs, obviously. And there's a total recognition that, 24 hours a day of being available and responsive is totally it's totally not achievable as a parent or a carer of a child. But in times of need, when babies and children are exhibiting, crying, communicating that they're scared, that's when we need to be the most responsive, providing a safe haven. So children and babies should feel that when they're really scared and all of that cortisol is being released, that somebody picks them up, gives them a cuddle and does some soothing language to them. And also it's really important that caregivers and parents have the ability to mentalize and read cues, and be able to regulate the emotions of babies. And what might be a barrier to being able to do that? Does anyone know it sounds really obvious that you should be able to like read your baby's cues, be able to soothe them, but what might stop you doing that? What might
If
be?
you're depressed.
You're depressed, yeah, being depressed makes it really difficult, doesn't it, to be able to respond to someone. Yep, so that's a really good answer. Anything else?
Tiredness.
Tiredness, yeah, we can all relate to that if you're a parent of a young baby, but being tired and that baby's been crying for hours, it gets to a point where it's really, really difficult to respond in a soothing way. Yeah.
Margarita says your personal emotional understanding and availability.
Yeah, and what might have a sort of impact on your personal understanding of somebody else's needs? What might have happened to make you unable to meet anybody else's needs or
Margarita
struggle?
says the way you have been raised.
Yeah, exactly. So if you've experienced parenting that was cold, detached, sometimes scary, sometimes abusive, neglectful, then you'll find it really difficult. You haven't been set that positive role model of someone who can respond to you. So you will struggle. We learn by experience. And then it can be really, really difficult for you when you become a parent to be able to be attuned because you never had that happen for you. So it's not something that people mean to do. It's just something that they've learned to do through their attachment style. So they almost have to learn to be a parent. They have to learn to be able to understand the cues of others. And that can be quite difficult.
Mandy probably used the right terminology, past trauma.
Past trauma, yeah, brilliant. Well done. Yeah. So experiencing past trauma. So yeah, so what can impact a caregiver's ability to provide a secure attachment? So yeah, own poor experiences of childhood, not having your own needs met, your inability to understand thoughts and feelings of others, feeling threatened or stressed by the needs of others, and external factors. So yeah, if you are living in an environment where you're suffering from domestic abuse, mental illness, or you have a dependency on drugs or alcohol, that would really impact on your ability to be tuned in to your infant. Some of this is beyond our control. If you've got 4 children, they're all born close together, or you have multiple, you have twins or triplets, it can be really hard, isn't it, to meet the needs of everyone, even in busy families, working parents, really, competing demands on our time. I mean, it's really hard to be tuned in all the time to your children. Like I said earlier, if the majority of the time you are tuned in, and children quickly learn that busy parents, if there's no malice attached and that you are able to explain, I'll be with you in a moment, and there's consistency, then that's absolutely fine. And I think going back to like when I started in this work, obviously as a graduate in my 20s, I was after all of the training I'd gone through, I was very sure that it was all about nurture. This was all about attachment. And any children I was seeing in my clinics who were experiencing sort of trauma, it was always down to the poor attachment or the nurture they'd received. But obviously, I've grown to realise that nature plays a huge part too. So you could have optimum attachment, you could have had amazing experience, but you still might struggle in life. And that's all to do with your own temperament. We're all born differently, aren't we? We all possess a unique gene diversity. That's what makes us all very different. And yeah, there are people that are born with sort of an optimistic personality versus those that are born anxious and more reserved. That's just genes. And obviously, those are all inherited, and we can inherit stuff as well. So, mental illness, neurodiversity, disability, some of those are inherited, and they all have an impact again on this nature nurture debate. And also our environment as well. This has obviously been borne out through identical twin studies. So we're all a product really of the nurture we receive, but also the environment, our genes, and the relationships we build around us. And also trauma as well. Trauma will have an impact on us, unpredicted trauma, the loss of a parent, significant illness. That also will have an impact going forward, and that's often beyond our control. It all sounds really, I sometimes thinking that we're saying, okay, if you've had a really poor early childhood experienced lots of trauma, can you change? Can your brain rewire in response to experiences and get better, or will you always be that sort of traumatized person? And luckily, the brain is known to have its plasticity. That means obviously it can become quite hardwired to experiences, but with time, we can change that. So growing up, if you start to experience things differently over a consistent period of time, then you may change the way you are able to behave and respond to other people. If you can form an attachment to a trusted person in later life who can give you possibly what was missing from your early childhood, that can help to change your experience as well. Therapy is obviously a big thing for some people who can engage in therapy. Some people can't. There's so many types of therapy out there. It has to be the right therapy for that person. Changing your environment, changing your relationship, moving on can also help to change your experiences. Some people find relaxation and meditation is helpful for rewiring the brain, as well as exercise as well, which obviously helps to release all those positive endorphins into the body that can counteract the impact of the negative hormones, such as cortisol.
I like what you said about temperament, that it's it's for some children, the environment they grow up might be fine. So you might feel that your sibling is like, they don't see anything wrong with your family, but if there is a sensitive child, they might actually, am I right thinking that way?
Yeah, that's right. And I guess it's like you're born, maybe your genetic coding is all there when you're born to maybe be a very quiet, thoughtful person. That's your genetic makeup. But then the environment you're born into might change that, mightn't it? It might exacerbate it and make you much quieter because you're living in a very busy household with noisy siblings who get all the attention. So you might withdraw even more, or you might sort of rebel against it. And so it's a whole mixture, isn't it? Every single situation for every child is so different and can change according to lots of different parameters. So yeah, your gene pool, your temperament, your environment, your siblings, your connection. And birth order, again, often what I'm finding is when I'm working with families, they'll say that child was always difficult from birth. And does it, just maybe because they had a difficult birth experience, does it become a predetermined factor that the child then acts up as being the difficult one? I know sometimes when I'm working with children, they'll say, well, I've always been labelled the difficult one, so I just carry on with that narrative because that's what everyone expects from me. So do you start to live up to what the expectations are from families, and you kind of play a part? I guess that's all in the mix as well.
And that's quite scary, isn't it? Because it's the words we're using and kind of printing
Yeah.
in a child's brains.
Yeah, yeah. And
Change
I had a
them.
child say it to me the other day. She's the middle of three, and she said, my mum said I was always the difficult one. And like to the point where they haven't taken her on holiday.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, because she's difficult. So she almost becomes more difficult. So it's like, you know, it's so hardwired in her now that I'm difficult. I can't be any other way. Yeah, it's really sad, isn't it? Just those flippant comments that were made by parents of, oh yeah, you're always the one that was difficult from day one.
And again, it's quite easy, you know, from the situation you're saying for us to judge, but we don't know what is happening exactly. So it's so complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and her mum was sort of saying we were doing family therapy. Well, I did have a really difficult birth. You know, there was a difficult time when I was pregnant, and it all may be linked in. So trying to understand what might have made her the difficult child and trying to see it differently so that we can move forward. Yeah, it's quite hard actually, just changing the narratives, changing the way we approach things. Yeah,
And the way we live, isn't it? Because we now kind of very kind of families that kind of bringing children by themselves, whereas in the past we
yeah.
used to be a huge community of, you know, cousins, aunties, neighbors, and
Yeah, the
there's
big
so much
extended
more
family.
pressure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they could all help out and take off the pressure, but now we're all a bit isolated. We don't have
Mm,
support mechanisms. We're under pressure to work, to perform. Schools are very pressurized sort of for children growing
exactly.
up. So it's really, really difficult. Yeah.
So I've got a comment from Andy. I always laugh at how different my two children when they were both born and brought up the same. Well, were they? Because one child was the single child, and the second child was brought into family of three people. So it's not the
Yeah.
same, is it?
No. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And birth order is quite a big issue, isn't it? Where you are, where you sit in the family.
yeah. Um,
And you play a part. Older children are often the most responsible, aren't they? Because they've had to, they're often the ones who, not in my family, not out of my three. But
there's
yeah,
always nuance, isn't it? So I think this is the one thing about working with the children. You always have to kind of like, yeah, they say it that way, but you know, it could be very different in your own family, in your own in that particular child.
yeah. And it's interesting as well for me, obviously, I was saying before I had my own children, I was very much on the nurture debate. And obviously my first child is neurodiverse. So, and throughout school was being labelled as ADHD. And the kind of idea behind my PhD was ADHD is very much misdiagnosed. It's often confused with trauma.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so there I give birth to my first child who causes chaos all the way through school. So it was almost like, so that's
Was meant to be
that's
to
right. And
challenge
then of
you.
course we've got a very strong neurodiverse gene running through my family and my husband's family. So I guess there's that. So yeah, the genetics plays a very strong part.
Mm, mm. Thank you very much, Karen. It was it was pleasure to have you here, and hopefully we can see you again in our other expert
Lovely.
seminars. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have
Thank you.
a good night. Bye bye.
Thank you.